everybody. Welcome to NonSequitur. I'm Kyle Curtis. Steve McCrae is up top today, and Dave is producing. And we have a very special guest with us tonight. I have been talking about him for weeks now. I am so excited that he is finally here. Mr. Brien Foerster, how are you, sir?
Very well. How are you?
I am excellent. I am ready to jump into some ancient civilizations.
Me too.
Thank you once again for joining us. And if you joined us last night, it surprisingly enough was the quickest, most watched episode that we've had so far to date. By midnight, in the 3 hours since we streamed, it racked up almost 4,500 views. So George, I think, made quite the impact in his second comeback. So thank you for watching, and we finally hit over the 1 million mark. So that is all thanks to you guys. We appreciate all your support and everything that you do to help us out. I'm not going to jump into slides today like we usually do. I'll just go ahead and tell you what we have coming up. Tomorrow is going to be debate roulette, like every Saturday. If you don't know what that is, if you've ever wanted to participate in a debate, we have a big wheel of topics that we'll spin here on the show. You will vote through a form in the description, and then the system will pick two random people, one from one side, one from the other. We'll bring you into the show, and in a 25-minute format, you guys will debate. Now, we've been seeking for that rec show, but we have not gotten it yet. We've done this 4 times, and every single time that we've done this, it's been very smooth. So me and Steve are starting to worry. We're looking to get some action.
We got to get a good dumpster fire in. I mean, come on, guys. We have faith in you. We know you can do it. Some of you can come in and give us a really good debate roulette dumpster fire.
It's coming. I can feel it. But that'll be tomorrow at 8 p.m. So that's all I'm going to jump to today. Let me go ahead and introduce our guest officially so that I can seem somewhat professional here. Brien has explored more than 90 countries, but his true passion is researching and writing about the ancient megalithic works found in Peru, Bolivia, Mexico, Easter Island, Egypt, England, and beyond. His 23 books are available on the website that is in the description, and also Amazon. He has appeared 15 times on Ancient Alien television series, as well as numerous other TV and radio presentations. Brien's popular YouTube channel contains more than 850 videos related to hidden history and megalithic sites. So welcome once again, Brien, and go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do and why you got into this particular field.
Well, I've been fascinated by ancient mystery since I was a little kid, and I started traveling when I was 16, and that gave me the opportunity to go to Stonehenge and other sites in England. And I've also explored Polynesia and various other places. And about 15 years ago, I first came to Peru, and I noticed that in the city of Cusco, which was the capital of the Inca people, that there were these megalithic constructions that would be very difficult to make today. And my guide kept telling me that the Inca, who were a Bronze Age culture, made them. And I said, that's impossible. There's also very little literature, scientific archaeological literature about the megalithic sites themselves. So being someone who's worked with power tools all of my life, I automatically figured out that parts of Cusco were constructed by some very advanced civilization, and that the Inca found an abandoned megalithic city that seems to have been destroyed. So I kept coming back to Peru and moved here about 10 years ago. And then through that, I've had the opportunity to see most of the ancient sites in Peru and Bolivia, and I've had the great fortune to also go to Egypt several times, and Baalbek in Lebanon, and Petra in Jordan, and planning on going to other locations in Turkey and the Middle East in the near future.
And when you say that it was an ancient civilization that built these structures, what kind of time frame are you looking at in terms of from what we know, what mainstream says?
Okay, well, mainstream basically says civilizations rose about 6,000 years ago. in the Middle East, more or less. And those were the first cities, the first advanced, well, not advanced, but complex civilizations. And then over the course of time, technology got better and better, bringing us to where we are today. But the megalithic works that we're looking at, in some cases, we couldn't replicate them today. And the time frame we're looking at, and this is based on also on the work of Dr. Robert Schoch, who's an expert on the Sphinx, is that there was a cataclysm that occurred about 12,000 years ago that drastically altered the planet. This coincided with the end of the last ice age. And so these advanced technological civilizations were basically wiped off the map at that point. And 6,000 years later is when the next wave of civilization began.
And so we're going to start with the Sphinx, because that's the one that's near and dear to my heart. But why would, for people out there who are listening, why would it be a point of contention that the dating isn't, more transparent? Why would the like the Egyptian officials, for example, why would they want to cover up what the date actually is and be so resistant on moving that date back?
Well, it's because it's a very complex subject, and you have to include other disciplines in. You have to include geologists because they are experts on stone and weathering of stone, etc. You also have to include engineers because they know how to build things. They know what it would require to build, for example, the Great Pyramid. How would you cut the stone? How would you move it? How would you place the 2.3 million stones of the Great Pyramid into precise placement? Things like that. And so archaeologists have been hesitant to bring other experts in, but that's exactly what I do because a geologist, again, is an expert on stone, so they would know based on weathering how old something like the Sphinx would be, not the records of the pharaonic people of Egypt, because there's very little reference to, if any, to the building of the Sphinx. There's lots of reference to repair, but not the initial construction.
So let's jump right into it then. Give us what the alternative theory behind the Sphinx and its dating, and we'll shift you over as we get into it and show the pictures of the actual deterioration, so that people can kind of see what you'll be talking about with the channels in the Sphinx enclosure. But just kind of take us through what that theory is.
Okay, well, I think the early 90s, a man called John Anthony West decided to bring a geologist called Robert Schoch from Boston University to the Giza Plateau to look at the Sphinx, because there is horizontal weathering, which would have been done by wind and sand, but there's also a lot of vertical weathering. And so when Robert Schoch saw that, he said, well, this has to be precipitation. So he consulted with climatologists, and they stated that heavy weathering had not occurred on the Giza Plateau less than 10 to 12,000 years ago. So Robert Schoch stated at that point that the Sphinx has to be at least 12,000. And he's now been backed up by over 200 geologists from around the world.
And when the Sphinx was, let's say we go back to that date and the Sphinx is built, are we saying that the Egyptian culture that we know now and that built the pyramids came across the Sphinx already built and just laid claim to it?
Exactly, and the Great Pyramids as well. They were there at the same time. The dynastic people arrived about 5,500 years ago. So when they arrived, they would have found the Sphinx in the Sphinx enclosure, the massive Sphinx temple, which is in front of it, which is how the Sphinx was shaped, and also the three great pyramids on the Giza Plateau.
And are the pyramids themselves, were they part of this timeline, or were they built when near about the time that they claim that it is?
No, I believe that the pyramids are also 12,000 plus years old. And the Sphinx, might be even older than that. It may have been the first construction on the Giza Plateau. The photo that you're showing shows the vertical weathering. And again, that could only be done by precipitation over a huge period of time to be able to carve those vertical lines in the limestone bedrock.
So if you're looking at the enclosure, correct me if I'm wrong, but the actual Sphinx itself is cut straight out of the bedrock. There's no pieces that it was quarried and assembled on the plateau. That's actually where it has stood the entire time. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't taken from blocks like the pyramid and put together. It was one big solid piece.
It is, exactly. And what the what it originally looked like was there was an outcrop called a yardang, and that turned out to be the head of the Sphinx. So what they did is they carved down into the Sphinx enclosure, and they cut one block at a time and moved it to the front to create the Sphinx temple. And some of those blocks weigh 40 tons. So that's not something that would have been easy at all for a Bronze Age culture like the dynastic Egyptians.
And how do we think that that was done back in, if you're going even older, obviously people are going to think that, tools should increase over time and not decrease. So what happened there with this group that was able to do it with whatever tools that they used, but somehow there's a lull and we get, the copper tools and stuff that the Egyptians, when they claim it was built, are using. What happened in that meantime?
Well, if whoever originally built the Sphinx probably had at least super hard steel, like cobalt steel, or even diamond encrusted saws in order to be able to cut this material efficiently. How they moved them is another question. And so then this great cataclysm happened, which coincides with the story of the flood, which we find in more than 200 different cultures from around the world. Again, dating at about 12,000 years, that was the time of destruction. And then there was a lull of more than 6,000 years when the dynastic Egyptians to this territory and found in place, and then started to do repair work. And of course, the Great Pyramid was named after Khufu. He decided that it was to be his pyramid. And also, another thing is that the face of the Sphinx has been carved, or was carved during dynastic times. So the face that you see there was dynastic, but originally the Sphinx was probably a giant lion.
And that was going to be my next question. Can you kind of speak to why we think it was a lion with the procession and where the constellation that it pointed to during the time that it, we speculate that it was built, because it lines up perfectly with that timeline. So can you kind of run through that for us?
Yeah, it points to the Sphinx points to Sirius. And so again, if you look at the work of Robert Bauval, he looks at a timeline of somewhere around 12,000 years ago as to its construction. But if you add another precessional cycle of 26,000 years, other researchers believe that the Sphinx could be 36,000 years old and was lining up to this Sirius star system.
Do you think that? Do you subscribe to that? Do you think that it was 36,000, or are you more into the 10,500 range?
I think it's the oldest structure, and I think John Anthony West might be correct. It might be like super ancient, and the amount of weathering of the surface and the amount of repair work that started during Khufu's son's time, named Khafre, which is like 4,500 years ago. Since repairs started at that time and have been done up until I think something like the 1960s. Also, the Sphinx enclosure has been filled with sand many, many times. If you look at photographs from the 19th century, you'll see that the Sphinx is up to its neck in sand. And And so that's why it's obvious that the face of the Sphinx was recarved, because it should be far more weathered than the rest of the body. But the neck and lower parts of the solid structure, which is still there, are extremely heavily weathered.
And there's a story too, and I believe that there's a tablet in between the two paws that talks about the pharaoh taking a nap underneath the head of the Sphinx, and it spoke to him and told him to uncover it, and he would become pharaoh.
That could very well be. There's that stele also has a series of almost what looks like a checkerboard pattern, and what that seems to be is the actual tunnel system and shaft system that exists underneath the Sphinx and the entire Giza Plateau, which most people don't know about.
And I was going to ask you about that, because you have a video on your YouTube channel where you actually got to go in and around the Sphinx, and you cut to a section in the back that has like an opening and almost like a drop in the back of it. Did you get to get any close to that and see what's down there?
Yeah, well, the thing that's special about the tour we do is we literally rent the Sphinx enclosure for 2 hours, which costs $4,000. And then we also rent the interior of the Great Pyramid for 2 hours, which also costs something like $4,000 to $5,000. So we're able to go in and literally put our paws on the Sphinx. And around the back side of it, there is a grate about 1.5 feet by 3 feet, which plugs into this rectangular hole. And the day that we were there, that grate had fallen down and was on the ground. So we were able to look inside, and we saw that there was a ladder that goes down inside the Sphinx. And the main caretaker of the Sphinx spends his time up near the head, because he's making sure that people don't do improper things. So nobody came to look at us while we were, sticking our heads inside the Sphinx, but we saw definitely a metal ladder that goes down, and in between the front paws there is a wooden section which is rectangular, which can be removed, and that's probably the other entrance into the shaft and tunnel system of the Sphinx.
And there are many that speculate that the lost what do they call it? Hall of Records is beneath that paw. Is that what you think?
Well, that's what some people think. I don't think there are chambers, because Robert Schoch used ground penetrating radar. They found at least one big chamber under the Sphinx. But I think whoever the civilization was that created it was so advanced that they didn't need to leave any kind of written record behind. I think the Sphinx itself is the Hall of Records. I think the chambers are the halls of records. And what that's kind of saying is that the Sphinx wants you to figure it out as to how it was made, what it symbolizes. And the same thing with the Great Pyramid. It's the proportions, scale, the design of the chambers inside, which are trying to tell you what it originally functioned as.
Can you, for those who don't know, can you give those measurements and how it lines up to true north? All the details that are just so precise that it couldn't be by coincidence. Can you kind of run through those and how that works with all four structures together?
Sure. Well, the Great Pyramid itself is aligned almost perfectly north, south, east, and west to less than a degree. Incredible precision. Some people say it should be perfect, but the Earth may have wobbled in between the time of construction and later. Also, the Great Pyramid is an 8-sided pyramid. It's not 4-sided. It has indents in the center of each 4 sides. It's about 500 feet tall. It's comprised of 2.3 and 2.5 multi-ton blocks that were harvested from the Giza Plateau area. There are granite blocks in King's Chamber that weigh more than 80 tons. And the granite itself came from Aswan, which is about 500 miles away. The King's Chamber, which is the upper one, is very acoustic. It responds to the sound of Om. And then the Queen's Chamber, of course, has two shafts inside of it, pointing to Sirius, I believe. And then the subterranean chamber goes 300 feet into the bedrock itself. And the thing about it is it looks like it's unfinished. Either that or there's a lot of weathering. But there are no hieroglyphs inside the Great Pyramid whatsoever. And we do know that the dynastic Egyptians loved to put hieroglyphs on absolutely everything. So that's another indication that it wasn't made by them.
What do you think the pyramids were used for? What's your theory on that?
I think they were energetic structures of some kind. I think that they were almost, basically collectors of energy, or focuses of energy that was then sent to the obelisks, because the obelisks as well were not made by the dynastic people. The obelisks are made of very hard granite, which the dynastic people could not cut and shape with their bronze chisels. So I think the obelisks were found in place, and then hieroglyphics were carved on after. So I think we're looking at an ancient, massive, almost Wi-Fi system that existed on the Giza Plateau area.
But Dave, let's go ahead and switch over to Machu Picchu real quick. I think this is from watching your videos, it feels like this is one of your favorite places that you go to. So I think that you do a very good job in every video that you do about Machu Picchu of going through and kind of displaying how there are two distinctly different types of stonework on here. And correct me if I'm wrong, but mainstream archaeologists will tell you that they were done by the same groups of people. But I'm going to let you kind of walk through as we cycle through these pictures and speak to why that wouldn't be the case.
Okay, well, this is actually it's called the Inca Roca Enclosure, and it's located in the city of Cusco. The quarry for this green granite isn't that far away. It's a couple of miles. But if you look at the picture, you see these massive blocks, some of them larger than a human. And then the upper ones, in an irregular pattern, are much, much smaller. And if you actually visit the place, you'll see that the large blocks are made of green granite, and the smaller ones are made of basalt. So two different quarries. So definitely this structure was repaired during Inca times. They found a megalithic enclosure that was very badly damaged, and they simply rebuilt the upper section.
And Dave, let's switch over to the next one. I'm going to try to get one. There's a good example. What about the actual building of this? What are the things that are holding the small rocks together? And is there any mortar or anything like that that are holding the bottom stones together?
No, the bottom level is completely mortar free. So those stones interlock three-dimensionally with each other, which is a very difficult feat. And we've had many stonemasons come with us to look at it, and they simply say, I couldn't do that with all the power tools I have. And then the rougher work is up on top, and you can see it's simply stones shoved in together to more or less maintain the same shape. But that's what we see. We see two distinctive styles at Machu Picchu. The lower section tends to be highly superior to the upper one. So that again indicates that the Inca people found an abandoned set of structures on top of Machu Picchu mountain and rebuilt it, and then built all of their vast buildings around a central megalithic core.
And do you have any theories as to what happened to the original structure? Like why it just kind of comes up to a certain point and there's no roof system, or the rest of the walls not there?
Well, again, it was an ancient cataclysm, and probably the same one that did the damage in Egypt and other locations like Baalbek in Lebanon. You see again, suddenly either work stopped or something hammered it, like a 9.5 earthquake that just obliterated what they were doing, and builders themselves. And then over the course of thousands of years, Machu Picchu was rediscovered. And then, because it's in a very strange location, it's in the high jungle, about 50 or 60 miles from Cusco. And it literally appears like the top of the mountain was cut off in order to build it, because the other mountains are very domed-like. So that's what makes Machu Picchu very intriguing. So I think the Inca found it at one point, and then they decided to rebuild it and then continue to build it. And it wasn't made famous to the world until a copy of National Geographic in 1913.
Is the civilization that came before the Incas responsible for the terraces that it's famous for, or was that there originally as well?
No, I think the terracing is mainly Inca, and they're a major architectural feat and engineering feat themselves, because some of the terraces are 12 feet tall. But this photograph, again, is another great example, because you see the lower section, everything interlocks perfectly, and then you have almost like rubble on top of it. So that would not have been done during the same time period. Also, if you look on the right-hand side of the picture, you see the curved wall. The upper two levels of stonework are inferior to everything below it. So that, again, is an Inca repair of the top two levels of that structure.
And what's the mainstream theory of why this is the case? Do they have an explanation for why there are two distinct different qualities and types of stonework?
Well, the conventional story is that the sites of the nobles, of the high Inca, of the priests, etc., the finest craftsmen would have been employed to do that work. And then the other buildings, the other 90+%, were for the people who worked for the Inca, so they didn't require buildings that were that well made. But you have the inferior stuff on top of the superior stuff, which it's not like a gradual fading out from from somewhere like Beverly Hills to East LA or something like that. You have it like next to each other, which doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
I agree. Okay, what are we looking at here?
Well, this is the lower section of what is called the Temple of the Sun, and that step pattern is the bedrock itself. And then on the right-hand side, you see stones that are interlocked into it almost perfectly, but there is some sign of cataclysmic damage and reconstruction by the Inca. Nobody really knows what this little cave functioned as originally. During Inca times, it may have been a tomb, but again, the Inca were not able to cut into the bedrock with precision like that.
Okay, Dave, let's go to the next one. This is what's amazing to me, the size of those rocks and how you would get them to where they are.
Yeah, this is Sacsayhuaman, and it's very close to where I am right now. And some of the stone blocks weigh 120 tons. One of them is one that weighs 120 tons is 29 feet long, and 12 feet of it is underground. And so this is a polygonal, massive wall structure that, again, the Inca found in place with cataclysmic damage, and then they repaired the top parts of it and turned it into a ceremonial structure. So again, this is another case of the Inca finding something that a very advanced civilization had produced, and then they made repairs to it and then utilized it.
I'm just curious as to what or how they explain how you get those blocks from the quarry to where they are now. Do they have a theory on how you would get something that size to where it's at now?
Well, their theory is that they were able to cut slots for wedges at the quarry. And then they would put wooden wedges in there during the daytime and pour water on the wedges. And then by next morning, the stone would have cracked, and then they would have been able to move 3 miles from the quarry to the present location. Is there are no trees, or there were no trees during Inca times that grew straight. The largest trees that are in abundance in that area are almost shrub-like bushes that grow like in a pattern like that. So you can't use them for rollers. And the greatest diameter of those trees is maybe 6 inches. Also take into account that Cusco is wet from rainfall 6 months of the year. So these things would start to sink in the ground as soon as you tried to move them. So very illogical. Again, any stonemasoneer that you bring to this location, they say that has to be a very advanced high technology.
And there's something too with the degree of how level it is as well. I saw that you do some things on that. Can you kind of speak to that?
Yeah, these polygonal stone walls tend to have about a 4-degree incline, and that's for stabilization. That straight is at least this is a leaning wall. So by having the stone leaning in a little bit, that makes it more or less earthquake proof. And the same with the Inca wall we just looked at. That was a rectangle with 4 walls leaning in by about 4 degrees. So the walls are pushing against each other, making the whole structure super strong.
And I don't think that I pulled a picture of it, but aren't these the walls that have the animals that are put into them as well? So if you stand back, you can see like one of them's a puma, and then there's one of a snake, I believe. So
yeah, sorry, that was part of the construction. And if someone doesn't show that to you, you won't see it. But once you see it, then you'll never forget it. So that there's a puma paw like this, that with 4 fingers or four toes. There's a llama, a snake, a fish, and a bird. At least that many of them were made during the construction phase, and we still haven't been able to figure out why they were involved. It may have just been a playful trick or something like that.
And to me, that it's almost as wild as the. I didn't put any pictures of this place in there, and I should have. But the Nazca Lines, I think, are something that most people, I don't think, know about, because it wasn't until I got into looking at these things, I had never heard of the Nazca Lines, and then when I saw them, it's hard to believe that that's something that's not as big as it is. Can you tell people just briefly what those are, and the only way that you're able to see them, which I think is kind of cool?
Yeah, the Nazca system of lines and geoglyphs go from the Bay of Paracas on the coast of Peru in a southeasterly direction to the town of Nazca. So that's a distance of about 150 miles. So in the Nazca area itself, you have these giant figures carved into the earth. The most famous ones being the hummingbird and what else? The spider. And they
Astronaut.
Are several hundred feet long. And the astronaut. And they were made over the course of 1,000 years by cultures, which most people don't know about. So the astronaut, for example, was made by the elongated-headed Paracas people between 500 BC and 100 AD. And then the Nazca culture constructed a number of them from 100 AD until 600 AD. So these figures, the animals, the famous ones are located at Nazca. There are about 30 of them, and you can fly a plane over them from Nazca to look at them. But in between the little town of Paracas and Nazca is another area called Pal, and there are more than 1,500 of them, much smaller in scale, but they're weirder. That you have anthropomorphic, half human, half insect figures. You have these giant runways on flat mountaintops. You have arrows pointing left, mandalas, and just like a phenomenal number of different figures that were carved into the surface over the course of years.
The interesting thing that I can't figure out is how they were able to make such perfect shapes without being able to see what they were doing, because you can only see these if you're flying up in a plane. So do you know if there's any theories on how they were able to shape those just from being on the ground?
Yeah. Yeah, I think actually it was quite a simple system. Actually, what they did is they would make a grid pattern on a piece of paper or bark or animal skin or something like that. So you'd have a grid, and then the designer would put the design onto it, and then they would develop a giant grid system on the ground using cotton rope and stakes. And then the designer would stand in a tower that was constructed probably of 3 or 4 10-foot level sections, and he would stand on top of that and look down with his drawing and then point out to the workers where he wanted the lines to be created. So they're not that mysterious in terms of how they were made, but it's mysterious as to why they put all the effort in, because Nazca is not a pleasant climate. It basically gets no rainfall and no cloud cover. So these people shaping them were working under very rough conditions.
That's a good question. I never thought about that aspect of it, but the grid system totally kills my theory. I was thinking that it was I had watched I forget the guy's name, but he said that there used to be some type of system where almost like a pulley, they would loop it over a piece of timber and hoist somebody up, and they would almost like, I guess what you were saying, but they would map out that way. It wasn't using a grid, but it was kind of like a call system where you had people that were moving, whichever way the pattern was going to go. So you had a guy that was strung up on like a pulley system, kind of shouting it out. But I think your way makes a lot more sense.
Well, there are trees
would it not be something like how they do crop circles? They do it in like a grid pattern. They do it from the ground flat rather than elevated.
Yeah, that's a different phenomenon. And actually, the making of the Nazca stuff is not that complex, because what you have is a clay surface underneath a granite covering of rocks, because it's a very complex geology over millions of years of volcanism. The whole Nazca area is actually the ocean floor that's been uplifted. And so all you have to do is scrape away the stones, and you reveal this white clay underneath. And so it's the contrast between the black and red granite stones and the clay that allows you to be able to see them. And also, since it doesn't rain in the area, they don't get damaged much, and there's very little wind at Nazca as well. So that's why they're perfectly preserved for 2,000 years.
Is there anything they can do to prevent erosion if the climate were to change, or is that something that once it starts to rain there again, those are going to be lost?
Yeah, they would be wiped out, but there are so many of them. I mean, again, they cover hundreds of square miles. It's a vast system, and the Peruvian government is very strict in terms of not allowing people to go anywhere near them. So if somebody was to jump the fence and try to walk towards one of the major figures, there are so many planes flying around Nazca showing tourists that the pilots immediately phone the police. Police are there within like 5 minutes with very heavy fines, because they're very delicate.
Did you hear recently that a truck actually made it across one of them and actually caused actual damage? Because, like you said, it's a very small topsoil that's actually the difference in color, right? And I guess some truck decided to drive over it. I think he's in a world of. I think he's actually looking at jail time.
Hopefully, he is. Yeah, there are actually 3 that are really close to the road. There's one called the Hands, one called the Tree of Life, and called the Lizard. And they're literally 20 feet from the roads, or miles away. So anyone trying to go there would be apprehended quite rapidly.
Okay, let's. I think we've already spoke to that one, and that's just the aerial view for everybody.
Yeah,
I think we're going.
Well, actually, this picture is really good, though, because this shows you on the right-hand side, you see the megalithic blocks in the lower half, and then the almost rubble on the top half. So that, again, is an Inca construction. And then the three-sided one that you see, the right-hand side has sunk into by more than 2 feet. And when I was a geologist, she said that would be that would have been an earthquake of about 9.5. And if it did that much damage to the megalithic structure, it would have destroyed all of Machu Picchu. So she said that's your evidence that that structure is older than the Inca, because they found it, partially sunken into the ground.
Is there any pieces of Machu Picchu that I know that when the Spanish came in, they did some, I don't want to say repair work, but they switched some stuff around. Is there anything that's on there now? Anything that the Spanish would have added, or is it just the two cultures of Inca and whatever was before?
Well, that's because in the 1530s. Well, when the Spanish Cusco in around 1532, runners were sent to Machu Picchu to tell them of this invasion. And so Machu Picchu was abandoned by the Inca on purpose, and they destroyed the 2 roads that led to it. And over time, because it's the high jungle, the tree canopy just almost immediately moved in and covered the site. So it was forgotten for almost 500 years. And because it was a secret location during Inca times, local people didn't know it existed. So that's why some explorers in the late 19th century found it. And then Hiram Bingham, the American, was the one who had a major expedition. And because he was linked with National Geographic, they did a full April 1913 article only about Machu Picchu, and that's how it became world famous. So the Spanish never knew it existed.
And what happened to the Incas that left?
Well, the Inca that left Machu Picchu went to an even more secret place in the high jungle called Vilcabamba or Wilcabamba, and they were able to live for 30 years until they were found by the Spanish.
Okay, Dave, I think we're going to Baalbek next, I believe. Yes,
oh, that's the unfinished obelisk.
Well, we can go ahead and start here. What are we looking at? This, to me, is one of my personal favorites to look at because, like you said earlier, it's just like people were working on this and everything just stops and you're left with almost like frozen in time.
Exactly. Well, this is the unfinished obelisk. The quarry at Aswan, which is in the southernmost part of Egypt. And if it had been completed, it would have weighed 1,200 tons. So the dynastic Egyptians did not have the tools to cut hard granite. And also, how were they planning on getting it out of the pit? Because the landscape is not flat. So clearly, some advanced technological civilization was shaping it, and then suddenly something happened. And this gives you a good sense of scale. It's absolutely massive.
Yeah. And I think that actually the next one is the one that actually shows. Yeah, there's people standing on the. That is insane. How is there anything like this in terms of its size anywhere else, like in Egypt, anywhere to compare it to, or is this the biggest one?
No, this is the biggest by at least 2.5 times. There are two there's one at Karnak, which is probably about 400 tons, but this one was going to be 1,200.
And do they have any theories as to when that was carved, or when they say it was carved versus when you might think it was actually cut out?
Yeah, they said during the time of Hatshepsut, which is 18th dynasty. And again, at that time, the hardest tools they had were bronze. And you can't shape granite with bronze because bronze is about 3.5 in terms of hardness, with diamond being 10 and granite is 7. So the tool has to be harder than the surface you're cutting. And in this case, bronze is half the hardness of the material.
So why was it just left. Are there any ideas as to why that just was forgotten?
Again, I think it was the ancient cataclysm of 12,000 years ago.
Right, but are there any, or what's the mainstream explanation as to why it just sat there? Do they have any theories on that?
Because it developed, or they found a crack as they were cutting down, and so because of the crack, they wouldn't be able to take it out in one piece. But I think the original makers found the crack and they decided to stop work because that one block was going to resonate. That, again, this goes back to the ancient energy system, that the Great Pyramid emitted energy, and then the obelisks were the receivers, and they were tuned to frequency to be able to absorb that energy.
And what would they do with that energy?
That I still don't know. It's possible that the obelisks were set up in strategic places to set up a force field of like an energetic field of some kind, not for electricity, but for some more esoteric purpose. But that's also why I'm going back in April of next year.
Have you been to the I forget what the name of it's called, but it's that chamber that has the huge sarcophagus in it that's like 20 feet underground, and the one where they had to like build side chambers to, thrust sand in and then push it out. It was on Maury and the antiquities guy that is real famous. His name slips me. But they did
you probably mean the Serapeum.
Yes.
Yeah.
Have you been there?
There are 25 boxes. 6 times. There are 25 boxes in there. They're underground, 800 tons, and there's almost no room to move it around corners. There's no evidence of any fires or candles or torches inside. The place is pitch black. It's one of my very favorite places because it's a clear example of lost ancient high technologies. These boxes are just astonishing. One of them has hieroglyphics carved on the surface, but the hieroglyphics look like they were done by an 8-year-old child. Whereas, again, the boxes themselves weigh 100 tons.
And they claim that those boxes, because they're huge, I mean, they're way too big for a person. They claim that those boxes were used for, I believe, bulls is one of the theories.
Yeah, but they're actually way too big for bulls as well. And they never found any mummified remains of bulls inside. So, again, I think they were part of the... Sorry.
I was just wondering why they would go to, where they pulled that from. I've always wanted to know what made them go to bulls on that one.
I have no idea. Again, it's this lack of logic. They say that they worship these bulls, and so the bulls required very special sarcophagi. So these big boxes must have contained bulls, even though no bull remains have been found.
And they're 20 feet in the ground. I mean, there must have been some special bulls for that to happen.
Well, and again, the course as one, which is 500 miles away. So the original size of the box would have been more than 200 tons, and then somehow they cut the top off of it, and the surface inside is almost perfectly smooth. The corners are rounded with incredible precision. You can fit about 10 people inside one of those boxes.
That's crazy. Okay, what are we looking at now?
Now we're looking at the Stone of the Pregnant Woman at Baalbek in Lebanon, and it's still attached to the bedrock, and you see there are people on top of it. That stone weighs between 1,200 and 1,500 tons.
And what was going to be the purpose of that particular stone?
Well, what we're looking at right now is the Quarry of Baalbek. The actual structure of Baalbek is about a mile away in the background. You can see a couple of columns there. That's where Baalbek itself is. And what we find there is we find 3 blocks lined up in a row that weigh 1,000 tons apiece. Then there's a wall of stones that weigh 800 tons apiece, and lots of other stones that weigh 400 tons apiece. And then you have much smaller work done by the Romans on top of it. So again, you have these two very distinct styles of building, one hyper superior to the other. And the Baalbek complex is huge.
Yeah, we've got
Yeah,
several
there you go.
pictures of Baalbek.
Yeah, those are 800-ton blocks.
And just for scale, guys, those are people on top, obviously. All right, Dave, you can run to the next one.
Yep.
There's a wider view
That
of
shows you the that shows you the Roman aspect. So most of the Roman work is relatively small and built on top of megalithic foundation.
That particular block that we were just looking at that was, stuck out in the middle of nowhere, why was that left, randomly? The cataclysm?
Well, again, it's like the it's like the unfinished obelisk. All of a sudden, like the quarry, they're moving these massive blocks from the quarry. There's that big one still in place. There's another one that they cut that weighed 1,000 tons that's still in place. And they recently uncovered another one underground that weighs 1,600 tons. So obviously work was being done to cut and shape the blocks and move them from the quarry to the Baalbek site. And then work suddenly stopped. Thousands of years pass. The Romans show up and they build a series of palaces and temples using the giant blocks as the foundation.
If you were to do it the way that archaeologists say today, back then that they did that, how many people would it take to carve out something that size?
Well, using bronze or even steel chisels would require hundreds of workers. And Thor Heyerdahl did an experiment on Easter Island because of the giant moai figures that are located there. He wanted to see how many people it took or would take to move a 1-ton block. So they were able to find basically 1-ton block in the quarry there. And it took 15 strong men to be able to push, using wooden rollers, a 1-ton block. So in this case, you have to multiply 15 times 1,200 to be able to get the number of strong men that would be required to move the stone of the pregnant woman once it was cut to the location at Baalbek itself. And how do you coordinate that many people?
That's what I was wondering. And I think that the way they say it was done now is by wetting the sand and rolling the block along. But I would just think that the block is so heavy that it would just splinter anything that you tried to put underneath it.
Yeah, exactly. And if you ask any engineer, they would just laugh at you if you propose that theory, because exactly what you said. Again, you're moving across a soil surface, so you have to have something that has to be perfectly round to roll on. The area is quite hilly, so you're also pushing this thing up and down hills and stuff like that. And I'm glad that we did this interview, because it shows how the fact that archaeologists don't consult with engineers to ask them their opinion as to, how would you move a 1,000-ton block from here to there? They just decide to make up their own idea without doing the experiment itself.
And the quarry just to go back to Egypt for a second, the quarry that the blocks for the pyramid and those structures are from are how many miles away from where the pyramids are now?
Actually, the core part of the Great Pyramids, the 3 pyramids, are from the Giza Plateau itself. So we see evidence of the quarrying marks there. In the case of, I think it's the 2nd pyramid, they had to flatten the surface before they started building the pyramid. So that required cutting down about 30 feet, because the surface is at an angle. So to make a flat surface, they had to cut it down 30 feet first and then start construction. But the casing stone of the Great Pyramid is called Tura limestone, and it's from the other side of Cairo. So that's somewhere in the region of 15 to 20 miles away. And then again, the granite, which is in the core, comes from Aswan, which is 500 miles away.
Yeah, that's way too far to be wetting sand to push heavy granite. Dave, let's go to the next one.
Yeah.
Okay. There's an example of one of the blocks, kind of like the one that was left, correct?
Yeah, that's about a 400-ton block. So again, that's part of the original construction. The staircase was added later by the Romans, and then the photo doesn't show the upper surfaces, but the size of the blocks on top are maybe a ton at most, but that's at least a 40-ton block right there.
It's crazy. Okay, Dave. And I know that you're going here soon, I believe, to Gobekli Tepe. Do you want to kind of speak to why this is such a important discovery that they made?
Yeah, Gobekli Tepe, I haven't been yet, but I will be going September of 2019. And what's intriguing about it is not the way it was made, because the craftsmanship is pretty poor, but that whole structure you're looking at was buried on purpose, supposedly at least 10,000 years ago. And they do have carbon-14 testing of organic material that shows that structure is at least 10 to 12,000 years old. So again, that is 4,000 to 6,000 years older than any recognized civilization. The other important thing is that's the big circular structure you see is only one of at least 30, if not 40 of them that are still buried. So Turkey has radiocarbon dated ancient structure in the world, or a series of them.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I heard that they're not going to excavate the majority of the site. Is that true?
That's what I've heard.
And why would that be?
And I have no idea. I have no idea why they wouldn't. Again, it's one of these things. Gobekli Tepe is actually quite inconvenient for conventional archaeologists, because the scientific proof is that it is 10 to 12,000 years old. And so they can't cover it up again. It's too late, because there are lots of photographs and video and scientific papers written on it. But I think they're kind of, they don't want to uncover the rest of it, because that would show how massive the whole series of structures are. And that would require an incredibly large population, reasonably sophisticated, to be able to set up this giant system of circles. So it's I guess you would call it an inconvenient truth.
And I don't think it's too controversial to say that everybody's pretty much in consensus that it was purposely filled in, correct?
Yeah, that's the consensus, that it was used, or it was constructed, it was used, and then it was buried on purpose. But why it was buried, why they didn't simply abandon it, is the big question. And that's what I'm looking forward to trying to find out when I go in September 2019.
And the reason that I think this is so important is because at this time, this is when they would credit people who are living on the planet now as just being simple hunters and gatherers. So if that were true, why would there need to be a place that was set up like a sustainable city and a permanent place, if we were supposed to be the nomadic hunters and gatherers and wandering across the planet? So I think you're right that kind of puts a little bit of a wrench in their narrative.
Yeah, it does.
Okay, this is recent, actually, and before we went live, I kind of sprung this on you because I think this is fascinating, and thankfully you said that you can speak to this. But this is in Guatemala, and I believe it was not even months ago that this particular discovery that we're going to talk about next was made. Can you walk us through what we're looking at and the bigger picture that lies underneath all that green?
Yeah, this is a giant Mayan complex that was, as you said, I think it was discovered by a new technique called LIDAR. So it looked like a natural hill, and then when they started to uncover it, it turns out that it's probably, in terms of volume, the second or third largest pyramidal structure on the planet in the middle of nowhere. It's a vast, complex ceremonial city. And so this shows that the Mayan people were even more sophisticated and larger in population and skill set than what we've been led to believe. For example, even a relatively famous site called Palenque, which is in the jungle of Mexico, they've only it was discovered like 100 years ago, and they've only excavated 10% of it. So places like this that have just been recently discovered, it'll take decades for them to be able to uncover it if they have the resources, because it's multiple square miles in size, and was a complete shock to most of the academics when it was announced that it existed. I think it's called El Mirador.
I think so. I think that's correct. And what you're looking at now is kind of like an aerial view now of what you would see if you were flying over it. And he spoke a second ago about LIDAR, and what that is a ground penetrating radar, and it allows scientists to see what's underneath all of the green that you're seeing. So basically this right here is what they see on their LIDAR. So do you remember the number? I think it was like 60-some thousand structures that they've found underneath there.
Something like that, and some very big ones. One of them has a larger footprint on the Earth than the Great Pyramid, so that means it's more than 13 acres in size, which is a huge undertaking. Just think of the resources required to build something like that. You need the workers, you need the people who are taking care of the workers, you need the engineers, you need the architects. On and on it goes. And enough food, obviously, to feed all these people. So I think that's the latest image of what this place looks like.
I think to me, it makes you wonder what else is out there to be found. Because you would think nowadays, with all of our technology and how we're able to go from place to place, that we've been everywhere and seen everything. But this is proof that, there were 60,000 structures hiding there, in all of that jungle. So, what else could be out there in other parts of the world?
Oh, yeah. And also there's abundant evidence that most of the pre-dynastic construction of Egypt was done on purpose underground. So the Great Pyramids, of which there are about 7, not on the Giza Plateau, but there are other ones in the area. They're the external expression, but the tunnel and shaft systems that I've been in go for miles and miles and miles underground, cut into the solid bedrock. So that's the stuff that is presently being covered up by Egyptologists. But slowly this stuff is starting to open up, and I'm not sure how many major discoveries will be made, but this new Mayan city is quite a shock and a pleasant surprise.
And before we take a couple questions from the audience, what's your opinion on? Well, I have 2 questions. What's your opinion on the Bosnian pyramid? Do you think that's actually a legit pyramid, or is that just a natural structure that kind of resembles one?
Well, I only express opinions on places I've physically been to. So I haven't been to Bosnia. I've been invited. It's just it's not on the flight path of where I normally go. I would like to go at some point. So it's a place of mixed opinions. Some people think that they're giant ancient pyramids, and other people think that they're simply mountains. So I won't say anything until I've been there and seen what they have.
That's fair. Have you ever heard of North Sentinel Island?
No.
I recently just found out about this place about 4 months ago, but it's right off the coast of India, and it's the only place in the world that's left that has not been touched by modern civilization. It's an island of that they think of about 1,500 native people. They have not yet discovered fire, and I think in '96 a boat crashed on the coast of this island, and the villagers killed both people who were in that boat. I mean, they were shot with arrows. The Indian government has declared that no one can get within like a mile of this island, but there are like several videos on YouTube of like helicopters flying over, and you see these people coming out. So I didn't know if that was something that you might know about since you travel a lot, but I think that's fascinating that there is still a civilization out there that has not even seen a helicopter or anything like that.
Yeah. Well, actually, I have seen documentaries on it. And the reason why the Indian government don't want people to go is that they would be, these people have not been in contact with foreigners ever. And contact, they would pick up disease and that would be the end of them. So that's, it's trying to preserve them more than anything else. So, yeah.
It would be fascinating, though, I think, to like fly a drone and see how daily life on that island is.
They
You just
tend to
gotta
shoot
think,
them
I mean,
down, actually.
Yeah,
They
probably
tried
shouldn't.
that. They tried, and they actually had helicopters. In fact, there's actually been deaths because they've had boats go out and try to film them and take pictures, and they throw spheres at them. Yeah,
That's
they
crazy.
killed some fishermen once. Yeah, they are totally isolated from the rest of society, completely.
But they haven't even discovered fire yet. I mean, that's what's wild to me. Anyway, I know that's off topic a lot, but I don't know if you had an opinion on that. Steve, do we have any questions from anybody?
I'm gonna start collecting them right now.
Okay. So why don't you tell us now about what you do for your Hidden Inca tours, and if people are interested in joining you on one of these, because you go all over the place. Like you said, you're going to Turkey in 2019. I think you're going back to Egypt soon. How do people find out more information, and what's a tour like? Like, what can they expect? How many days are they gone? That sort of thing.
Okay, well, we do three tours of, three major tours of Peru and Bolivia per year, maximum of about 20 people. And they're not tours, they're actually scientific missions. So we go on some level so that I can discover new things. So we don't keep repeating the same story and the same locations necessarily. We almost always discover things that we haven't found before because we tend to have at least one engineer with us that comes along, usually a medical doctor. So we do that. And then also we do Egypt every spring. And these tours average about 10 days. Then we're going to be doing one of India in this coming January because there's a lot of megalithic stuff in India that had to have been done with high technology. As well, we do Mexico once a year because Mexico has some examples of megalithic work. And then, we'll be including Turkey at some point. So they are completely unique tours compared to anyone else because we bring in local experts to provide us with new and oral tradition information.
That's awesome. And where's your favorite place to go before I turn it over to Steve in the live chat? What's been your favorite place to visit?
Well, they're all kind of like chill. I don't have a favorite. Each one has its own character, its own original function. They're all of the ones in the highlands of Peru that we visit. Each one has its own personality to it. So Machu Picchu is the most beautiful, but it's not located. There are other places like Ollantaytambo and the photos we saw like Sacsayhuaman that are actually more to construct than Machu Picchu. So technically they're more interesting, but in terms of sheer beauty, Machu Picchu cannot be beaten by almost any planet.
Excellent. Okay, Steve.
All right, we got actually a number of questions here, and there's more coming in. So if I don't get your question right away, it's probably because it's buried in 5,000 different people chatting right now. So the chat's going kind of crazy. So I'm going to try to keep up. So the ones I've got so far, I'm kind of going to go in the order that they were asked in, if I can here. So first question was asked is, what is your opinion of the Cambodian temple of Angkor Wat? If I'm pronouncing that right. I know it's a Cambodian temple, but Angkor Wat, I think it's pronounced. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Angkor Wat.
Angkor Wat. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I haven't been there yet, but it's huge. There's also Angkor Thom, which is next door, which is huge. Like, these places covered vast amounts of acreage. Some people I know who have visited see signs in the foundations of like advanced machining technology. One sad thing about it is that supposedly way too many tourists go there now. I obviously want to go at some point in time, but not until 2020.
One cool thing about Angkor Wat, real quick, Steve, is that on the summer solstice, the middle, I don't know what you call it, that decorative kind of post up top that has kind of like a bell shape. They've got it, or they made it to where when on the summer solstice, the sun literally rolls up the side of that bell and then comes down the other side perfectly.
Yeah, kind of like there's a one in I think it's I don't know if it's a Temple of the Moon or Temple of the Sun. Somewhere in Chichen Itza or the Yucatan Peninsula, there's a temple that has like the serpentine, and at a certain time of the year, as the sun moves across it, looks like it's undulating. Which I mean, again, I think they had vast amount of experience with astronomy, and they knew exactly when the summer solstice was, and they knew the celestial sphere. Somebody wants to know. Actually, this would be Digital Hammurabi wants to know what you think of the work of Zachariah Stitchin.
I honestly have only been able to read about 10 pages of one of his books. The Babylonian, Sumerian stuff, I haven't been in yet, but I will get into it at some point. Once the Middle East starts to calm down on some level, I'll go and see, Sumerian structures and things like that. But I haven't been able to get into Sitchin's work that well at this point, but it may come later on.
Okay. And somebody wanted to know, this was a super chat, so thank you, Brant. Want to know if the granite was carved using dorite stone and not just bronze, or what it was actually cut by, do you think, as far as the tooling?
Well, that's the biggest question, because we don't have evidence of the tools. All we have are tool marks. So I honestly believe that in both Egypt and in the highlands of Peru and Bolivia, technology was used that we don't have, like it's beyond us. And that's one of the toughest things for people to understand, is that we're looking at civilizations that are beyond our capability.
Okay. Somebody had asked, could you please explain more about the pyramids being energy collectors and Wi-Fi relays? How would a stone pyramid store anything aside from thermal energy?
Well, if you take into account the tunnel system that runs north, south, east, and west underneath the Giza Plateau, we have strong evidence that there was water, that there used to be ancient water running through those tunnels, and they were cut to very specific dimensions so that the water itself would set up a resonance. And that is something that probably the King's Chamber would be a condenser or collector of the energy, again, tuned to ohm and octaves of ohm, and then that energy would out to the obelisk that would absorb that energy. But beyond that, that's why I go, is we get pieces of the puzzle each time we go, but there's never like a eureka moment. Oh, gee, this is how the whole thing worked. These things are way too complex. And the one thing I can't stand is when somebody writes a book called "I Have Solved the Great Pyramid" or "I Have Decoded It," because nobody has. It's very, really complex intellectual engineering stuff, and we are getting there, but it's like being half a staircase. and you still have the other half of the staircase to go up before you figure it out.
And
like
by the
copper
way, you are
wire
breaking up
behind
just a little. Is he breaking up just a little bit for anybody else?
Yeah, modulating just a little bit.
All right. What were you saying,
If you
Kyle?
can hear us. I was in the
I'm not
Queen's behind one of those shafts in the Queen's chamber. Didn't they find some like old something copper that was inside of the like attached to the wall with like hieroglyphs on the left hand side of it? They had some robot that went in. I forget what year it was, but it was like a big long pole. What, Steve?
You're talking about one of the hieroglyphs that like looks like a light bulb? That one?
No. I know about that one. This was they went into the Queen's chamber. It was like 10 years ago, I think, and they had a robot that looked like a little army tank with a big, long, looked like a cannon almost, and there was a camera on the end of it, and they had got a hole where they put a camera in. And on the wall, like opposite, from what I heard, I don't know if it's true, this is why I'm asking, but they claimed that there was some form of copper wire or something attached to the wall with hieroglyphics that were going down. Is there any truth to that?
Yeah, there are two wires on the backside. Like the little robot was called Upawat, and it drilled a hole, and then it was able to stick a flexible camera in with a light, and it's almost like a circuit. These two copper wires that are sticking out, but they're heavily eroded by something, and then there are schematics in red ochre paint, supposedly, on the wall inside this, the backside of this chamber. But as soon as that was figured out, then the Egyptian government kicked the German guy who had the robot, kicked him out of the country and said, "You're never coming back," because he discovered something that wasn't supposed to be there.
You would think, though, that they would know that's a possibility before they let somebody build a robot and stick a camera through the other side of the door. I mean, that just seems like poor planning on their part. If you're worried about what's on the other side of the door, don't let somebody else build a robot that can go find out what it is.
Well, they probably thought they wouldn't find anything because, but when the discovery is made, especially in Egypt in the past, it's much better now. Actually, they have a new, not president. They have a new leader of the Supreme Council of Antiquities, and he's actually opening places up that have never been open to the public. So he's great. The previous guy, Zahi Hawass, was awful. But the new one's great. We got into something called the Osiris Shaft, which has never been open to the public. And it's a series of shafts that go down 200 feet into the bedrock. And I filmed the whole thing in high definition 4K video. And the guards didn't even want to come in and see what we were doing. They just sat outside and smoked cigarettes and drank tea. So Egypt has changed a lot in the last 2 years. Like, stuff is opening up.
I've heard you can bribe them and climb the pyramid still, even though it's illegal.
No, that's well, it's highly illegal. It's also very dangerous because if you slip, you're dead. There is no oh that hurt. It's like ow.
Yeah, that's true.
Silence.
Yeah. Okay. Any more, Steve?
I'm just curious. Have there been a lot of people trying to climb them and dying from it? I mean, I know a lot of structures. Probably people died making them. I'm like the Hoover Dam has like 100 people that died that literally got buried in it. And I know a lot of people died making the pyramids. But is anybody trying to actually, in modern times, climb them and have been killed by that? Is that something that's actually occurred?
As far as I know, they have. And then, of course, the family sues the Egyptian government.
That's the Darwin Award.
Your son did that. Well, it is, yeah. But your son did that illegally, Yeah. Oh, yeah, but you're still responsible. It's like, no, we're not.
Yeah, you can't.
There is no
be responsible for.
Yeah. No, there is no climbing the
Great
Pyramid insurance.
Yeah, who would want to do that, to be honest with you? Do you think there's any evidence for an ancient alien nuclear war?
There could be. There's a site called Mohenjo-Daro which is in Pakistan. It looks like it was hit by laser blasts, but that may actually have been solar plasma from the sun. That's the theories we're working on. That part of the major destruction of the Great Cataclysm was plasma bursts, and that's the theory again of Robert Schoch. If you look up his work, you'll see it theoretically very possible that that's what caused the end of the last ice age as well. I have seen melted stone in Egypt that could only have been done by something like that, not by a campfire or a blowtorch or something. We're talking scorched melted surfaces that would require very high heat.
They call them CSEs, right?
Okay.
Like the solar emissions.
CME.
Corona
Yeah,
solar
something like that.
Coronal mass ejection, but coronal mass ejection doesn't actually contact the Earth. It dissipates in the magnetosphere, but it causes problems nowadays because we have obviously a lot of things are electronics, and you have the grid, and it can wreak havoc with satellites. But as far as I know, there's been no deaths from a cosmic, coronal mass ejection. But anyways, now next question. Not yet. It had to be pretty big. Do you think there's any structures on Mars? Like, for example, that would be like Richard C. Hoagland's Sardonia region.
I do.
Okay.
I find Mars fascinating.
So, do you think
I think something
the face on Mars is actually a face?
I do. I think Mars had an advanced civilization. It was probably taken out again by the cataclysm of 12,000 years ago. I've been fascinated by Mars since I was a little kid, and it's just one of those things. When you get a sense of when you're a kid and you're fascinated by a mystery, there's usually something real about it because your mind is very open to stuff. But then when you develop like I studied science in university, then it has to go under scientific scrutiny. But Mars is, very interesting. And why have 5 missions to Mars suddenly just, we lost the ship, or no, the satellite just turned itself off. I think they're studying that place. The same with Antarctica. I think there's stuff in Antarctica that they don't want us to know about because it's mind-boggling.
I was just going to say he should plan instead of hidden Inca tours, you could do hidden Mars tours in like 2025, and I would sign up for that.
Yeah,
I would be down to go to Mars.
Yeah, no,
I'll phone Elon Musk and see what he has to say.
Mars is not very hospitable.
Awesome.
People think Mars is like, we're all going to go Mars and be just like Earth. No, Mars is not a very hospitable planet. I mean, just the Polaris alone, pretty much anything you put there is going to be oxidized to the point where it's going to be rusted and destroyed. I think it's going to take a long time before you. No, I have no desire to go to Mars. I like it nice here on Earth. I'm comfortable here.
You haven't seen The Martian? What? You can with Matt Damon.
No,
he gets stuck and he has to grow potatoes. It's very good.
Yeah,
but you can grow potatoes on Mars. So I heard
it was pretty good. I heard it was good, but I haven't seen it yet. Now I do remember the Martian Chronicles, but that was Ray Bradbury. But that was brilliant. The books were brilliant too. But that's a sidetrack. Okay. See, follow up. They actually want to know if you know anything about Coral Castle. I don't know if that's something you've ever dealt with.
I haven't been there, but yeah, that was made by Ed. I think his name's Ed Lee Skellion. He was like 5'6" and 110 pounds. And somehow he was able to manipulate blocks that weighed 40 plus tons made of coral. He died with his secrets. He said that he knew how the pyramids were made. So one of these days, I'd like to see it myself. But again, it's one of those cases where it's a great mystery where someone was able to do something by himself and then died taking all of the knowledge with him.
Have you been to Easter Island?
Twice. Going back in October.
How have you seen them since they've excavated from, the entire bodies are actually in the ground. A lot of people just think it's the heads.
Right.
That stick
no,
up.
it's the whole body.
What's the tallest one that's there?
I think it's 40 feet or something. It's 45 feet.
That's crazy. I was one of those people too up until recently that thought it was just a head, and then I saw a picture of a guy standing. They had dug out the ground, and he was standing up at the back of the base of it. And how anyone on an island that small with that small of a population can create, I think there's like 80 some statues.
No, 900.
Oh, 900. Maybe I was reading 800. But yeah, that's even crazier.
Yeah.
All right, do we got time for a couple more?
Okay, 2 more, please.
All right, 2 more. Our buddy Ganesh wants to know if you've researched anything as far as India and advanced, or excuse me, alien civilizations in the region of India.
In India?
Yeah.
Yeah, there are megalithic sites in India that almost nobody's ever heard of, including most of the Indians. There's evidence of giant lathes that were working, cutting basalt into these huge columns. The tool marks are still there. There are cave systems which are technically almost perfect, cut into super hard stone. So again, it's another example of oh, my ancestors made this. It's like, no, they didn't. Somebody else did, and then your ancestors found them. So that's why we're going in on a 14-day tour in January to India to see some of these places.
Yeah, I think he's talked about Indus Valley and Dwarka. Does that sound familiar?
Dwarka, yeah.
Okay.
Dwarka, I think, is actually underwater.
I have no idea.
I'm not familiar with India either. I know there's one place off the coast of Japan that I'm aware of.
Yeah,
okay,
that's
the
the
last question.
Yeah.
What was it? Off Japan?
Yeah, it's called Yonaguni.
Okay. The last question, somebody wants to know, and I'm not sure there was any. I didn't know this was something that was controversial, but they want to know if the Great Wall of China was strictly man-made.
That's something I would love to. Again, I haven't been there, so I don't know. Best thing to do is go on something like Google Images and look at as many photographs of the Great Wall as you can. And if you notice that the lower stones are 10 to 20 or 30 tons in size, then it's likely that the foundation could be megalithic. But it would require looking at lots of photos to be able to tell or not.
Okay.
Awesome.
That's about it, Kyle.
Cool. Well, that was fantastic. I'm so happy that you decided to come talk with us. And I hope that people now can kind of see where we're coming from, and in the fact that it's not that it has to be something that's that controversial, because all we're saying is that we're a group of people that existed on Earth that were smarter and capable of doing more things than what mainstream archaeology gives them credit for, in my opinion. And I'm gonna let Brien sum up his, and once again tell you guys where you can find him, and then plug your YouTube channel. And I recommend everybody going and watching his videos, because they are very, very fascinating, and he lays it all out there for you in terms of the information for each structure. So you can't go wrong with any video that you choose.
Great, thank you. Well, now I have 950 YouTube videos, and I've written 35 books. You can look up my YouTube channel either under my name, which you see on the screen here, Brien and Foerster, not spelt in the conventional ways, but I love to have more subscribers, because I do give away about 90% of my information for free. YouTube is by far the best way to distribute information, because in a 5-minute video you can cover a lot, and people don't tend to like to read books anymore. So most of my latest videos are now in 4K, and especially ones from Egypt from March. I still have 2 or 3 more to upload. We discovered a lot of stuff this year that we hadn't known about last year. with the Osiris Shaft being the most impressive, because again, it had been not accessible to the general public ever, and it's been open for a year and a half. I think we paid $4,000 to rent it for 2 hours, but that's the only way you're going to get in there. So if you go with a group, our group paid like $75 each for a 2-hour experience that maybe 200 people on the planet have seen so far. So if you have the option of going to Egypt with a group, I would definitely get your tour operator to book the Osiris Shaft, because it's proof of a very advanced high technology. It's one of the best examples. And I just want to say thank you to all of you for watching me, and I'd love to come back on the show maybe in 6 months.
We appreciate
We would love to
it.
have you. Absolutely.
Great.
Anytime.
Thank you for taking the time
And,
to answer the questions.
And guys, we will see you tomorrow at 8 o'clock for Debate Roulette, and then Sunday at the same time for Flatline. Be another weekend like last weekend. Good deal. Thanks for watching.
Okay, thank you.